Assalamu alaikum. This is Umar Osman from Muslim Strategic Initiative. We're here today with Sheikh Abdul Nasser Jangda talking about the role of the masjid in the community. Before we get started, Sheikh, can you kind of talk about your experiences going around the country? What have you seen that shaped your perspective?
There's a few things that went into giving me the current perspective I have of masjids. And first of all, of course, everybody growing up goes to the masjid. Alhamdulillah, I was blessed with a father and a family that we were always very, very active in the masjid. We were involved in the founding of the masjid. My dad was one of the founders of the masjid. My uncle was a founder of a couple of masjids in the area. So we were always very involved with the masjid, so kind of attending board meetings as a child, praying at the masjid pretty much on a daily basis, if not multiple times a day, being involved in any and all activities at the masjid. So that was an experience that I had from the outset. Secondly, alhamdulillah, when I was really, really young, I memorized the Quran. What that resulted in was, it resulted in me being involved at the masjid myself, leading Taraweeh prayers, leading Qiyam, and eventually even leading the daily prayers when the Imam couldn't make it, or if I was at the masjid when there was not an Imam present. Later on down the road, alhamdulillah, once I started studying Islam formally, I became a khatib, and eventually, alhamdulillah, it led to me not just being a speaker or khatib at the masjid, but I was a full-time imam for almost 3 years.
And now you travel a lot as well, all around the country.
Absolutely. So then traveling around gives you a really full, a proper, big picture perspective of not what's just going on in my masjid, but what's going on in all the masajid all across the country, all over the U.S.
Now, I've also had a similar experience, and I've seen my father be involved in a couple of different projects. I've seen a couple of masajid up close. Would you say that the projects that you see across the country, do they have individual problems that are unique to each community? Or do you see a lot of the same problems that everyone is having difficulty dealing with?
Yeah, what's interesting is that not just from a political standpoint or from an administrative perspective, but even spiritually speaking, religiously speaking, the problems that we're finding in the vast majority of the masajid all across the country are pretty consistent. It's the same issues everywhere. There might be slightly different manifestations of those problems, but at the end of the day, if you're able to read into the problem, it's pretty much the same issue everywhere.
Okay, so let's cut to the chase. Let's cut to one of these core problems that at least I personally feel that we've seen a lot of communities. And that's the issue of what's the role of the masjid to begin with. What purpose does the masjid serve? What audience is it serving? What services should it provide? So at the core essence, Sheikh, what would you say is the true purpose that the masjid should provide for the community?
That's a very, very interesting situation. It's one that I've been talking about a lot lately, both with friends and with other community leaders, and even on a public platform. I feel that the masjid is it's supposed to play a very diverse role in the community. It's supposed to have, it's basically many institutions built into one. It's supposed to be a community center, a youth center, or a youth lounge, if you will, an educational, a university, if you want to call it that, a college, a university. It's supposed to be a prayer space. It's supposed to be the outreach center, etc., etc., etc.
Now, these are all things that we might look at a masjid and say that these are all the things that we hope that it becomes.
Right.
But looking back on history, though, yeah, what would you say were the goals and objectives of the people that established our existing institutions? Did they have these same ideals in mind, or did they have a different picture going forward?
No, definitely. Look, at the end of the day, from an usul perspective, from a fundamental or principle-based perspective, which is how we should view the deen and the religion to begin with, whether it be fiqh or tafsir or hadith, everything is based on precedent. And the precedent is, the ultimate precedent is the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, peace and blessings be upon him, in Medina. So when we look at that masjid, it basically was playing all of these roles. It was an outreach center to the point where when Christian tribes are coming to the city of Medina to interact with Muslims or to inquire about Islam, they're sleeping over in the masjid. Halaqas are going on, so education is there. People are being fed. Even when campaigns are going out, even if they are political or military campaigns, they're basically departing and arriving back at the masjid. So the masjid, celebrations are happening at the masjid. So the masjid was that diverse institution.
Like a community center.
A community center. But what I also wanted to add to this whole discussion is the role of the masjid, right? So Ideally, it should be playing all of these roles, and these should almost be extensions of the masjid. But at the end of the day, the core of the masjid is it's a place that unites the community. It's a place where, look, as human beings, we're diverse creatures, we're diverse creation of Allah. Like Allah says in the Quran, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعْرَفُوا, that we are different people, different ethnicities, different races, different genders, different economic backgrounds, financial status, etc., etc. So we are a very diverse creation of Allah. There's got to be something that unites us at the end of the day, and we all know it's our faith, our iman that unites us. But we need to make that something a little more tangible, that there's got to be a place that unites us as well. Like at a university, you have a university commons. And when students are there, there's no law student, medical student, engineering student. It's just students hanging out. Right. And Muslims got a place where they can just hang out and be Muslims. And that's what the masjid is supposed to be.
So that's what it should be. I'm going to kind of play the other side of it for a moment here. And I want to talk about some of the things that divide the community when it comes to the objective of the masjid. So we know, as you mentioned, that it's a place that unites. It's a prayer space.
Right.
Now, what happens when a community is conflicted on what the goal of the masjid is? So let's say, for example, you have one faction that wants it to be a place of worship or a place of education for the community. Another faction might want it to be a place for weekend education for their children, or Quranic education for their children. Someone else wants it to be a youth outreach center. Someone else wants it to be an interfaith center. How do we balance? Because obviously these are all good intentions. These are all noble goals. But how does the community balance these competing objectives when they're starting out a masjid project?
I think at that point in time, you have to assess the basic needs, the foremost of your community's needs. What is the most pressing need within your community? And I think that basically has to take the primary role of how you're going to focus your project and how you're going to drive this project.
Okay. Once a community is settled on this, though, another thing that we see is that a community might, a lot of times, let's take an example of a masjid that is born out of a need for having a place for Friday prayer.
Right.
And so a community will work hard, they'll establish a place like this, but then you'll see conflict rise in the community because they can't agree on how to split up their resources.
Right.
Some people want to, for example, spend extra resources on Sunday school. Some people are concerned about the Friday prayer. Some people are concerned about the daily prayer. Once they've kind of established this, they've had a goal going forward, but now a lot of conflict has come into place because people can't agree on, where to direct the main vision of the masjid, essentially.
Right. I mean, that goes back to this. The diversity of a community is going to create these problems. So to a certain extent, a little bit of confusion in this area, or at least a dialogue or a discourse in this area, is something natural and something that's going to happen. And we almost have to go in assuming that this is going to happen. But at the end of the day, so let's just go ahead and, based on what you're saying, is yes, the masjid should be focused around what is the most pressing need of the community. But if the community can't even come to a conclusion about what is that most pressing need,
right.
Everyone's got a different opinion based on what is that need. I think at that point in time, you have to give priority to, first and foremost, establishing a place where at least people come together, people can be there, and people can be comfortable there together. So at least creating, I guess essentially we could call it that community center again, where at least it's a place for the people of that community, people with those different perspectives, to come together and meet together in a place, and then they can start to drive their own projects. There's nothing precluding the fact that, I'm going to take the lead on the Sunday school, you'll take the lead on the youth activities.
Right.
Someone else is going to take the lead on the humanitarian or the outreach efforts. There's nothing wrong with that. But where's that discourse and where's that designation going to happen at the first place? We got to have this open space that is welcoming and friendly to everyone, and that is essentially what you call the masjid.
Sheikh, you've mentioned this point a couple of times about the masjid being a place that unites people,
right,
and a place that's welcoming for people. In your experiences thus far, I know you've traveling and counseling and things like that. What would you say are some of the major factors that make people feel unwelcome at the masjid? What do people need to watch out for in their communities that they can say, this type of behavior is pushing people out and it's not fulfilling our mission of being an accommodating and welcoming place?
There's two things. The first amongst them is going to seem very obvious, and it's one that maybe if you would have asked me that same question maybe 7, 8 years ago, I probably wouldn't have given you two things. I would have listed just one main primary factor. So I'll start with that one. The primary factor is, of course, the attitude of the people, the nature, the environment that you create. We have to create an environment of exclusiveness. These videos and these discussions are meant for a more mature audience. There's always a joke I always want to make. There's something that comes to mind whenever we have this discussion about making the masjid very welcoming and inclusive and friendly. But it doesn't seem very appropriate to make this joke about a masjid discussion, but I'm going to go ahead and make it anyways. Because I think Muslim Strategic Initiative wants these to be very cutthroat, straight to the point,
no holds barred.
No holds barred type of discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and make it. There used to be an old TV show called Cheers. Bad bars, haram, alcohol, bad, all right? So that there's no scandal breaking out of these videos. But the theme song of that show was something very, very interesting. I think it used to go something like, "I want to be somewhere where everybody knows my name."
Your name, yeah.
Right. So I want to be I want to go somewhere where everybody knows my name. And I can't help but think like, what an amazing concept being applied to such a horrible place like a bar. That should be the philosophy that we should apply to the masjid.
Now, I know a lot of people watching are going to say, well, I know a bunch of board members at my masjid that don't know my name.
Right.
Who is the onus on here? Is the onus on the people that established it, the people that have been elected to run it, or is the onus for the welcoming something that falls on every single person that's attending, regardless of their position?
I think it falls on everyone. But I can't help but say that the people that are in the position of responsibility, there is an extra burden on them to establish that culture and that environment. The Prophet ﷺ, gave us the principle, gave us a code to live by. كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. Each and every single one of you is a shepherd. He's responsible and will be asked about his or her own responsibility. What I was saying before was, so the primary factor is the attitude, the environment of the masjid. That's got to be fixed. We have to be welcoming, and then that is a whole discussion on its own. What does that mean, that we have to create a more welcoming environment and attitude at the masjid? Well, that has a whole line of discussion about ethnicity. That if the Somalians are only talking to the Somalians, the Pakistanis are only talking to the Pakistanis.
The Arab masjid and the Desi masjid.
That creates a problem. So we got to do away with that. Secondly, it can happen in terms of financial status.
The rich people masjid, the inner city masjid.
Absolutely. And within masjids, you have different cliques. Even sometimes in terms of career or, professions. So all the doctor saabs are huddled up in one corner and all the taxi drivers are huddled up in another corner. That also is extremely unhealthy. Like, you're not at work anymore.
Right.
The point of the masjid is to cross those lines. And then the most important one, I think the most detrimental one that we see today, is the age divide from older people and younger people. Old people and younger people who go to the same masjid do not talk to each other, do not interact with each other. And it's a huge problem. And now we can have a whole discussion.
And we will have another video about that,
We'll sit down and we'll talk about it in detail. But at least I want to say this much. I want to drop at least this much right now, that we got to start communicating across these lines, social lines, boundaries that we've created within our community. So that's the first thing. The second thing that makes a masjid an unwelcoming place, or can make it a not an iman raising experience, but an iman draining experience, that is very, very sad, and it's a bit controversial, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about it right now. And that is even the allocation of space, the construction, the layout of the masjid.
If I can stop you for a second, I want to jump back to the attitude issue.
Right.
And then I want to discuss this in more detail. But on the attitude issue, as you said, the people in leadership have an additional responsibility on their shoulders. As a community member, if I see someone in a leadership position acting in a way that reflects a bad attitude, that's unwelcoming to people that are coming there, how do I, as a community member, approach someone in that position of leadership and try to give them some nasiha about the way that they're acting, and try to make them understand the ramifications of their actions without being condescending myself? I know that's a tough question.
Right. But that's the point of these videos. Requires a lot of wisdom, a lot of hikmah. Wisdom comes quite a bit from experience, not solely from experience, but experience is a key element, a key factor, a key ingredient of wisdom. I think what needs to happen is identify the problem, understand the issue, communicate that issue or that understanding that you have that situation, communicate that to someone that you trust, someone that is a little bit maybe easier to talk to than that particular person, and the person that you are communicating it to is someone who that person will be more willing to take advice. So there's a board member that's becoming a problem in the masjid.
Right.
Identify the problem, maybe, identify a solution to that problem. Maybe find the former board member, find an older uncle, the grandfather of the community, who might be a little bit easier to talk to. Sit down with him very humbly, very sincerely, and honestly convey your concerns to him. And then don't even necessarily tell him, and I think you should do this, or I want you to do this. No, no, no. I noticed this. I personally think it's a problem. You have a lot more experience. I know you're going to handle this a lot better than I would. And put a little bit of faith in it and trust into people. You know something, subhanAllah, we have to have a little bit of tawakkul. Wherever there might be a problem or there might be a problematic person, subhanAllah, Allah's always provided a person who has the rank, the ability, or the credibility to be able to kind of put that person in check. And having that faith and having that tawakkul is very important.
Is it wise to frame the discussion as more opposed to maybe the actions of the person? Is it wise to frame it in respects to the purpose here? That is, certain behaviors are creating an unwelcoming environment.
That's the first course of action, no doubt, and that's typically the advice people hear, that may be going and telling the imam, requesting the imam, which, by the way, we get tons of requests about. So sometimes if you come and make a request to us, if we don't talk about it right away that same Friday in the khutbah, please don't be offended. And I'm not even trying to joke around or be facetious. I'm being very honest. It's like an appeal to the viewers, to the listeners. Don't be offended if you made a suggestion to your imam that, Sheikh, I noticed that people are doing such and such. Could you please address the problem? And if you don't notice him addressing it in the following week, don't be offended, because realize he's got a long list of issues that are being brought to him. Nevertheless, that's the first course of action.
So that's the discussion here when we're talking about the true purpose of the masjid.
Right.
We're establishing a list of priorities.
Right.
So then, on this long list of issues, the core of the issue here is what's the true purpose of the masjid.
Right.
Right. So when it comes to everyone's rights being alienated, what's number one on that list? Is it the unity and welcoming issue?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'll even go as far as saying this. The first thing I wanted to say about that is, even though the first course of action, the typical advice is create a general discourse about that. So maybe if somebody was, picking on a kid who showed up wearing shorts, or had like
someone smoking in the parking lot, or someone comes in with tattoos and earrings.
Exactly. And so maybe telling the imam that if you could kind of address the issue of people not scaring people away from the masjid, that's the first course of action. But the reason that I gave the advice that I gave is, my observation's been, and having been in that role of trying to impart advice on a more general level to the community, sometimes people don't get the message. Sometimes there's always that one guy that didn't get the message. And that's okay. He's a part of the community too. He's a brother of ours as well, or a sister of ours as well. Nevertheless, that's what I'm talking about. Then you just got to find that one person that's got the clout to be able to sit down with that person and say, I love you. You're my buddy, but you got to watch out for this.
You just have to exercise some level of patience at that point as well.
You do. And I'll go as far as saying this. You talked about a list of priorities. I honestly think at the current level that we're at, a good friend of ours, Abdurrahman Murphy, who's a youth director, how the way I defined his job to him was that, we have the front gates of the ummah, the front gate of the community, where when one person a week takes shahada, takbir, Allahu Akbar, hugs and kisses and gifts and whatnot, website, Facebook updates, take pictures with them, hug him, all that good stuff. But what we forget about is we have a back door to the ummah too. And the back door is wide open. And people are walking out the back door in droves, by the dozens. And we got to man that back door. Somebody's got to go back to that back door, got to close the back door, and has to basically kind of redirect the people at the back door and kind of say, no, it's okay.
And you found that a lot of times people that are going out the back door is because of the issue of...
The same issue. What a daunting proposition to show up to the masjid to begin with.
Especially as a new Muslim or someone that's considering
somebody
becoming.
watching these videos might even be motivated enough to where you're sitting down and watching a Muslim video, an Islamic video. I mean, the people, the common average Muslim that's out there right now, and we're not even talking about non-Muslims, the common average Muslim that's out there right now, it's a very daunting task to even come to the masjid. This person some way, somehow found the courage to show up. Now when they show up, you got to realize it doesn't take a whole lot to scare that person away. And we should never, ever, we should humble ourselves and we should never be arrogant to the level of saying, oh, well, that's not my problem if that person's going to be so scared of the masjid, if that person's going to be so cowardly or whatever. No.
It's not my responsibility.
No. We do not have the luxury to say that. Our beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, was so motivated in this regard to reach out to the people that were far away that Allah had to actually tell him in the Quran, take it easy, relax, you're going to kill yourself. You can't save the entire world. Take it easy. So that's the mentality we got to operate it with.
So changing gears for a second, the second point that you mentioned aside from attitude was the competing priorities within the masjid. So let me frame a couple of debates that I've heard in the masjid. So I've seen a debate about whether funds should be spent to expand classrooms for Sunday school. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times the fight might be, well, we might need more parking space for Jummah. Right. What's more important, the weekend education for our children or servicing the adult crowd on Fridays? Another debate that I've seen is the establishment of a masjid, then there's a fight over the school. Who takes the bulk of the resources? Is it the people that come every day to pray? Or is it the maybe 5 to 10% of the children that are actually being serviced by that school? I guess first is, what conflicts have you seen? How does this contribute to this unwelcoming environment, as you said, in the masjid? What problems have you seen it cause?
There's two things. The first is allocation of resources, and that's more about finances. But even before we get there, I even want to talk about the construction of the masjid, the building of the facility. I'll give you a very, normally when I say that, I know everyone's thinking we're talking about the sister issue again. The wall or no wall, etc. Before I even get there, I'll give you even a more practical example of how we just aren't facilitating community. We're facilitating just, almost eccentricities of the people that were involved in the construction project. Let me give you an example. My masjid is 10 or 11,000 square feet. All right. The prayer hall of my masjid is 8,000 of those square feet. And then the other, 3,500 square feet are taken up by classrooms, we'll do bathroom, etc., classrooms, whatever.
The imam's office.
The imam's office, which should be very, very nice for obvious reason. And we literally have extremely minimal space for actually community interaction. Let me give you an example. So the musalla is so enormously large, which is only used once a week on Friday. And then what happens after prayer? What happens if I come to the masjid and I need to talk to other young people? I need to talk to other young fathers who also have young children. What are you doing about where are you going to send your kids to school next year? Hey man, what did you do about, are you looking for a job? The typical type of dialogue we need to have in a masjid, in amongst a community.
Just the general things that people are helping each other out with.
Right. So if 3/4 of the masjid is just the prayer hall, prayer finishes, I sit at the back with you, Umar, where are you going to send your son to school next year? And all of a sudden, what happens? Some uncle from the front, shh, go outside and talk. People are praying here, brother. You know how many times I've been told off? And
there's 3 people in a 3,000 square foot space.
Right. And I've been told off not even when I was a young kid. I got told off dozens of times when I was a young kid. I'm talking about now. When I'm the person who just led the prayer, I'm the one who just gave the khatara after salah. I'm walking out and somebody's trying to ask me a life and death question. Somebody's trying to ask me, my mother's on life support, can we pull the plug?
And the masjid hasn't provided a place for you to be able to speak to these people.
No, and this guy's asking me a life and death question. I've never seen this guy. He just showed up to Isha so he could look at the guy who led the prayer and ask him, Islamically, will I be able to unplug my mom? And now I can't tell this guy brother, this is the prayer hall. Why don't you meet me in my office in 20 minutes? I can't risk that. I gotta talk to this guy now.
You might lose him.
I might lose him. And I'm trying to tell him subhanallah, brother, let me talk to you on the corner. And I'm giving you a real example. I'm not giving you a hypothetical. I take this guy to the side and I have an uncle get in my face. People are praying, brother. And I said, subhanallah, brother. I mean, I don't even have a place where I can go and I can talk to this guy. So that's a very, very prime example. Now, we also have the sister issue. Now, again, controversial issue. I apologize, but we got to talk about it. Whatever your school of thought is, whatever your opinion is, and I personally think that, and this is something I've been talking to other fellow imams and community leaders and shuyukh, and I'm actually finding a lot of them to be consistent with this particular opinion, that it almost should be left up to the sisters, kind of how they want to handle it. To what extent do they want the actual prayer space to be designated or separated or defined, etc. But I do think that a common area is needed, aside from even the prayer issue. I'm just talking about there's got to be common community spaces, places where families can even be together, people can be together.
Just
people
community
can,
events,
community
graduations, and
I can even tell you, it's even very, very disorienting to young families, where the young family cannot even sit together just being at the masjid. Whether it be a park bench or whether it be an open community hall or a multi-purpose hall. I have very, very small young children, babies essentially.
you can't sit with your wife and kids at these occasions.
I can't. I can't. And it's almost like we're like bouncing the kids back and forth between each other. I also want to...
Like carrier pigeons, just, is she ready to go yet?
Yeah, and I also want to run around with my daughter at the masjid. I want to sit with my daughter at the masjid and say, you see him? He's reading Quran. He's doing Allahu Akbar. He's praying right now. Of course, my wife, I want her to be imparting that to her children, but I want that experience with my daughter as well. I want that experience with my children as well. So now when my children are with my wife, they're inaccessible to me. I can't even go and access them. I can't even go and talk to them. I can't even go and see them and be with them. We really got to figure out a lot of these issues. We have to. This needs to become a priority. And then you were of course talking about resources. That's another big issue. Where are we going to apply our resources? Look, Islamic schools are in need of the time. Sunday schools are in need of the time. Jummah khutbahs are major situations. Masajid on the East Coast, there are multiple masajid, dozens almost, which have almost been shut down because of the fiasco that Jummah creates. But at the same time, I can't help but say that you got to do that which is most beneficial, which is the first priority for your community. Remember, I'm talking about the back door again. We got to lock up that back door. And we got to put our resources towards locking up that back door and doing whatever it takes. I'm involved with a masjid project. That's another thing I didn't mention in the beginning. After all my experiences, I'm actually one of the founding members and the chairman of a masjid that is currently beginning its construction. We're in a rented facility. We're going to construct. I'm not the imam. I'm actually the board member. So I'm living life on the other side now. I've become the evil board member now.
Got a lot of criticisms about that coming up.
So I'm the board member right now. And very clearly, because of this perspective of mine, the first facility we're building for masjid, and pretty much even when the masjid is done, the focal point of the entire project is going to be this huge auditorium gym type of structure.
Now that's a unique situation in fairness.
Right.
A lot of masjids aren't doing that, but one example that I did want to bring to light, and I see in a lot of communities, I think inshallah we can conclude on this point for this session, is the issue of the Islamic school and Sunday school. You're talking about shutting off the back door. So if a community is in a bind and they can't agree, how do they come to this decision? Do you make space to accommodate a crowd at Jummah? Does the masjid focus on community service? Or do they focus on the Islamic school, where we understand the importance of Islamic schools, but realistically speaking, it often services a small percentage of the community's population? And that's not to take away from the need of these institutions, but how does the community balance those needs versus the needs of the overall community?
Very, very easy, simple answer. As complicated as it might seem, it's very simple, very easy. I'll go back to precedent. Realize this. We are not the first faith-based communities to be tackling these issues and problems. We are not the first religious minority in this country. We are not the first immigrant transitioning to indigenous culture present in this country. There are communities dating back hundreds of years who have come here before us and dealt with similar issues. Look at what they did and get smart. We need to learn. I'll give you a very practical solution. Like I'll talk to you about something practical, not theoretical, practical, something that I am currently trying to implement at the moment. I referenced the Masjid project. So we're building this gym structure. Guess what? You can pray Jummah in there. We're
Okay.
literally next to the gym. We're building like the size of an office, like a small carpeted room where we can pray 5 times daily prayer, because our current maximum daily prayer attendance is around 40 people. 40 people can pray in like a large office, very honestly. So we're going to build a small little carpeted room that could accommodate maybe about 100 people, brothers in the front, sisters in the back. And, we can pray 5 times a day in there, so we're not running all that electricity in a big old gym. Jum'ah, you go pray in the gym. The Prophet ﷺ said, جُعِلَتْ لِيَ الْأَرْضُ مَسْجِدًا وَطُهُورًا. The entire earth has been made a masjid for me. Why do we have a problem about praying in the gym? Okay, we live in Texas, so it's kind of hot out here. I would tell people who live in nicer parts of the country, like California or something, what's wrong with praying in the parking lot, Jum'ah? What's wrong with praying at it? Why are we so spoiled? I mean, I don't
So
understand.
it's not an issue of resources and
It's about being-
fundraising more and building more structures.
It's
It's an
about being
issue
smart.
of working smarter with what you have.
Yeah, my dad always tells me, you don't have to work harder, just work smarter. And so you have a huge space, you can pray Jummah in there. Classrooms, we got Sunday school, we got halaqas, or we got Quran classes going on. We need to build classrooms. Let me tell you something. You build a classroom, the cost of building a classroom could be $30,000. All right, let's not build a classroom. You were actually with me, you were involved in this decision-making process at a masjid previously. You remember those ScreenFlex dividers that I bought?
Yes.
Yeah, you can actually get ScreenFlex dividers that are 8 feet tall, that are actually soundproof. And you know how much a big ScreenFlex divider costs that's enough to cordon off a large size classroom? It costs about $1,800 or $2,000. You could go build a classroom for $30,000, or you could
You
buy
can make your own
You could-
adjustable classroom.
adjustable classroom for $2,000. Just be smart.
So the issue is not so much competing priorities, but taking all the priorities together and figuring out the smartest way to accommodate all of them.
Absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with building something nice and beautiful and more permanent. Nothing's permanent, of
But
course.
it comes with its own time
It
and
comes
place.
with time. It comes with time. We got to let things mature. We got to let things come
Marinate
about.
a little bit.
Yeah, it's an organic process. That's why sabr is such a huge quality. That's why actually, and I guess we could almost end on this point. Usama ibn Zayd, a young Sahabi of the Prophet ﷺ, the son of Zayd, who was the adopted son of the Prophet ﷺ, towards the end of the Prophet ﷺ's life, he basically compiled, he put together, he assembled a huge campaign, an army, if you will. And he put this very, very young man, this 16, 17-year-old young man, in charge of it. He was the Amir, he was the leader. Now, of course, this is usually referenced quite a bit when talking getting them involved, but I'm actually referencing it for a different reason. There were a lot of very, very senior people, very knowledgeable, experienced, qualified people in that assembly, in that army or campaign. And some of them started to become very uneasy with the prospect of their leader being younger than their own children. So this unrest, disrest, it got back to the Prophet ﷺ. And when the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, found out about it, he assembled everyone together and he goes, I know there are very experienced, knowledgeable, qualified people amongst you. And I know some of you are very uncomfortable with me appointing this young man as your leader. But you know why I've appointed him as your leader? He said, لِأَنَّهُ أَصْبَرُكُمْ عَلَى الْجُوعِ. Because he is the most patient amongst you when it comes to hunger. He basically said patience is his defining quality, trait, characteristic. And the reason why patience is important is patience is needed in community building and leadership. We cannot jump the gun. We cannot afford to jump the gun. We need to be patient, because when I become overzealous about building this one structure or establishing this one program or investing the money here or there or doing this or that, what I'm naturally going to do, I'm going to end up neglecting a huge, necessary, urgent need of the community. And that's what we got to come to terms with. We got to be patient, we got to be smart, and we got to think and plan for the future. You know, a lot of times when we talk about dunya versus akhirah, we sometimes think that leads us to being not forward-thinking people, like planning
Right.
for the future, somehow an un-Islamic concept. The Prophet ﷺ said, hikmah, wisdom, is husn tadbir. It is planning things out in a very excellent fashion. So having a good plan, a good roadmap, a well thought out roadmap and plan is actually the definition of wisdom, and it is prophetic wisdom.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Abdul Nasser, for joining us, and we look forward to filming future installments, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thanks.